The story begins on a warm evening, inside the crowded lobby of the America's Got Talent studio, where thousands of hopeful contestants waited anxiously, their hearts pounding, their dreams whispering, louder than the noise around them. And among them stood a quiet young Filipino man, holding nothing but a small guitar, an old photograph of Freddie Aguilar, and a lifetime of stories he had never spoken aloud. And as he took a deep breath, he knew this moment was bigger than a performance. It was a revelation, a truth he had carried in silence for years, waiting for the world to finally hear it. He didn't walk in with fame or connections, or anything glamorous, but he walked in with something far more powerful, something that would soon take over the entire stage, the judges and millions watching around the world. He stepped forward slowly, listening to the echoing footsteps of other contestants ahead of him, feeling the weight of history on his shoulders. Because today would not just be an audition, it would be the day he introduced himself to the world, not as a random singer, not as a dreamer from the Philippines, but as the hidden son of legendary musician, Freddie Aguilar, the man whose music shaped generations, yet whose personal life carried chapters still unknown to the public, and today one of those chapters was about to unfold, right in front of Simon Cowell. The young man didn't want sympathy. He didn't want fame. He simply wanted a chance to sing, to honor the blood in his veins, and to prove that he, too, carried the soul, depth and passion that his father had poured into every song he ever wrote. As he waited backstage, the producers asked his name, and he paused for a moment, because saying it out loud felt like exposing a secret. But he finally whispered it, and the staff immediately looked at him with surprise, asking softly if he was related to the legendary Freddie Aguilar, and he only nodded, not wanting to make it a spectacle, not wanting the audience to know until the right moment, until his voice could speak for him. He wasn't here to ride on a last name. He wasn't here to brag. He was here to let music tell the story, the way his father always believed music should. And so the producers kept the secret quiet, allowing him to go on stage like any other, ordinary contestant, but this would be no ordinary audition. Inside the theater, the lights were blinding. The stage felt endless, and the judges' table glowed with anticipation. And at the center of it all sat Simon Cowell, arms folded, face neutral, eyes sharp as ever. The young man walked out slowly, gripping his guitar tightly, feeling every heartbeat echo through his chest as the entire audience fell silent, curious watching this soft-spoken Filipino boy, who seemed nervous yet strangely composed, like someone who had lived through storms and learned how to breathe through them. Simon raised an eyebrow, sensing something unusual in his presence, something deep, something unspoken, and he leaned forward slightly, waiting to see what story this young man carried. The judges asked him where he was from, and he said softly that he came from the Philippines, and the audience cheered proudly. But then came the question that made him hesitate, the question about who inspired his music. And for the first time, he lifted his eyes and said the name he had never publicly claimed, the name that carried decades of emotion, legacy, and respect. He said, "My father is Freddie Aguilar." And the entire theater gasped. The judges looked at each other in disbelief, and even Simon, who rarely showed surprise, blinked, processing the truth that had just been revealed. Simon's expression softened, but tightened at the same time, a rare mixture of curiosity and shock. Because Freddie Aguilar was not just a Filipino icon. He was a global voice, a storyteller, a legend whose songs had crossed oceans, and to see his son standing quietly in front of him was something he never expected. But Simon didn't smile, he didn't make assumptions. Instead, he said one thing in his calm, serious tone: "Then the world is watching you tonight. Do you think you're ready?" The young man nodded, but not with arrogance, rather with humility, with a quiet fire in his eyes that made the entire room lean in, knowing something extraordinary was about to happen. He placed his fingers gently on the guitar strings, inhaling a breath he had held for years. And in that moment, the room went still. Every whisper stopped, every movement froze. And even Simon Cowell leaned back in his chair, sensing the shift in energy. Then the first note came out. Soft yet powerful, fragile yet commanding, carrying the unmistakable warmth, storytelling and emotional depth that Freddie Aguilar had built his legacy on. And within seconds, the audience fell into a trance. Because this wasn't imitation. It wasn't copying. This was lineage. This was soul. This was the sound of a son, carrying forward the voice of a father he barely knew. The judges sat stunned, their eyes widening, their expressions turning from curiosity to disbelief. Because this young man didn't just sing. He poured his life into every word, every breath, every vibration of the guitar. And the performance didn't feel like an audition. It felt like a confession, a story, a message to the man he called father, even from a distance. The lyrics trembled with longing, with respect, with a pain that had shaped him, but also with a pride that lifted him higher than the stage lights above him. The audience couldn't look away. People whispered, others cried quietly. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Simon Cowell froze completely still, eyes locked on the young singer, as if the world around him had vanished. Simon Cowell, the man known for stopping auditions, for delivering harsh criticism, for rarely showing emotion, didn't move even an inch. And the camera zoomed in on his rare reaction, the way his eyebrows lowered, the way his jaw tightened, the way something in his expression shifted, from evaluation to admiration, to something deeper respect. Simon recognized sincerity. He recognized truth. He recognized when a performer wasn't performing, but living the music. And in this moment, he saw something that shook him. This wasn't talent, this was history. This was heritage. This was a voice shaped by pain, silence, and destiny. As the performance continued, the young man sang a verse that wasn't in the original song. A verse he wrote himself, a message for Freddie Aguilar. A plea, a thank you, and a promise all in one. And when those words filled the theater, the crowd erupted into tears, because they could feel the rawness, the vulnerability, the lifetime of emotions he had finally allowed himself to release. The judges' table looked emotional, and even Howie Mandel looked speechless, leaning closer as though trying to absorb every ounce of meaning. The young singer poured into the mic. Heidi Klum placed a hand over her heart, visibly moved, and Sophia looked glassy-eyed, shaking her head in disbelief. When the final note hit, a long, trembling, perfectly controlled note that echoed through every corner of the room, there was a moment of silence so powerful that it felt like time had paused. No one moved, no one spoke. Even Simon remained frozen, staring at him as though processing what he had just heard. And the young man lowered his guitar slowly, breathing heavily from the emotional weight he had carried through the entire performance. And then suddenly, the audience erupted into a thunderous standing ovation. People cheering, shouting, crying, waving flags and chanting his name, even though they had only just learned it. Simon still hadn't spoken. He sat there unmoving, his eyes locked on the young Filipino singer, with a seriousness that made the entire theater hold its breath again. And finally, after nearly 10 seconds of silence, Simon stood up from his chair. It wasn't fast, it wasn't dramatic. It was slow, deliberate, meaningful. The kind of standing ovation Simon Cowell only gives once in a decade. And the crowd gasped louder than before, because when Simon stands, it means something historic has happened. The young man lowered his head, overwhelmed, tears gathering at the corners of his eyes, because he never expected this moment. Not from Simon, not from anyone. Simon spoke softly yet powerfully, his voice echoing without effort, telling the young man that talent like this doesn't just appear, that it comes from legacy, from life, from truth, and that his father would be proud, not because of the name, but because of the courage he showed tonight. Simon said he froze because he had never heard anything like this. A perfect balance of storytelling, emotion, and soul, something that doesn't happen often in the AGT world. He said that the young man didn't come to audition. He came to heal, to connect, and to honor. And he did it in a way that the entire world would never forget. The votes from the judges were instant unanimous, overflowing with praise. But before they could speak further, the audience began chanting something loud, something powerful, something that shook the entire theater. Golden buzzer. Golden buzzer, golden buzzer. The judges looked at each other, but it was Simon who glanced up at the golden buzzer above him, his eyes filled with a mixture of emotion and control. He walked his fingers along the desk slowly, making the audience scream. But then he paused, looking at the young man with a seriousness that once again brought silence. Simon said, "Whether I press that button or not, you have already made history. But the world deserves to see what comes next." And with one swift, powerful movement, Simon slammed the golden buzzer. The theater exploded. Golden confetti rained from the ceiling, like a storm of dreams and destiny. The young man covered his face, falling to his knees in disbelief. The judges rushed toward him, hugging him, congratulating him, lifting him back to his feet as if carrying him forward, into the future he had never dared to imagine. The audience cried, screamed, danced, capturing videos, waving flags, and chanting his father's name and his name together, as though two eras had finally merged into one moment of pure magic. Backstage, the producers hugged him. His fellow contestants embraced him, and he held the photograph of Freddie Aguilar close to his heart, whispering something only he could hear, something meant only for the man who gave him life. And music? Reporters gathered, social media exploded. And within minutes, the clip of his audition began trending worldwide, spreading across the Philippines like wildfire, across Asia within hours, and across the world by the end of the night. Fans of Freddie Aguilar felt chills, tears, and pride, hearing the familiar tone in a new generation, hearing the legacy live on in a voice that felt both fresh and deeply connected to the past. As the young man left the stage, still trying to process everything that happened, Simon Cowell walked backstage, something he rarely ever did, and approached him personally. He placed a hand on the young singer's shoulder, telling him that greatness was not inherited by name, but earned by courage, and today he proved he carried both. Simon told him that his father changed music, but he had the chance to change hearts, to inspire new generations, and to tell stories through the gift he had been given. The young man nodded, tears falling, unable to find words, because everything he had held inside for years had finally been released. And so began the journey that would shake the world. News outlets reported nonstop. Fans created tributes. TikTok flooded with reactions. Filipinos everywhere felt a wave of pride, and people who had never heard of him before were suddenly searching his name, replaying his audition, sharing it with friends and family. Comment sections filled with thousands of people, saying they cried, that they felt the soul of Freddie Aguilar return, for a moment that they had witnessed history being made on the AGT stage. And through it all, the young man remained humble, grounded, grateful, knowing that this journey was only beginning. In the weeks that followed, he prepared for the next round, still emotional from everything that had happened, still trying to believe that Simon Cowell, the toughest judge in the world, had frozen during his performance, had stood for him, had pressed the golden buzzer for him. He practiced tirelessly, his guitar becoming his companion, his memories becoming his fuel, and his father's music guiding him through every step. He didn't want to overshadow his father's legacy. He wanted to expand it, to honor it, to carry it forward with the same heart that Freddie Aguilar once poured into songs that touched millions. His semi-final performance would once again shake the world, but But nothing would ever compare to that first audition. The moment the world discovered Freddie Aguilar's hidden son. The moment Simon Cowell froze. The moment a young Filipino man stepped out of the shadows and into the lights of destiny. That day became more than a performance. It became a story, a history. A moment that people would replay for years. A reminder that music is not just sound, but blood memory, emotion, and truth. And as the world continues to celebrate his journey, one thing remains certain. This was not just an audition. This was a legacy reborn, a story continued, a name carried forward not with fame, but with heart. The world had been stunned. Simon had been frozen, and Freddie Aguilar's son had finally found his voice. Not behind a legend, but beside one, ready to write the next chapter.